अथ द्वादशोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवं सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वाम् पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषाम् के योगवित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः। क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते। ये तु सर्वाणि कर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन माम् ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहम् समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम्। मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिम् निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वम् न संशयः। अत चित्तम् समाधातुम् न शक्नोषि मयि स्थिरम् अभ्यासयोगेन ततः मामिच्छाप्तुम् धनञ्जय। अभ्यासेऽप्यसमर्थोऽसि मत्कर्म परमो भव मदर्थमपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिमवाप्स्यसि। अथैतदप्यशक्तोऽसि कर्तुम् मद्योगमाश्रितः सर्वकर्मफलत्यागम् ततः कुरु यदात्मवान्। श्रेयो हि ज्ञानमभ्यासात् ज्ञानाध्यानम् विशिष्यते ध्यानात् कर्मफलत्यागः त्यागाच्छान्तिरनन्तरम्। अद्वेष्टा सर्वभूतानाम् मैत्रः करुण एव च निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः समदुःखसुखः क्षमी सन्तुष्टः सततम् योगी यतात्मा दृढनिश्चयः। मय्यर्पितमनो बुद्धिः यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः। यस्मान्नो द्विजते लोकः लोकान्नो द्विजते च यः हर्षामर्षभयोद्वेगैः मुक्तो यः स च मे प्रियः। अनपेक्षः शुचिर्दक्षः उदासीनो गतव्यथः सर्वारम्भपरित्यागी यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः। यो न हृष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न काङ्क्षति शुभाशुभपरित्यागी भक्तिमान्यः स मे प्रियः। समः शत्रौ च मित्रे च तथा मानापमानयोः शीतोष्णसुखदुःखेषु समः सङ्गविवर्जितः। तुल्यनिन्दास्तुतिर्मौनी सन्तुष्टो येन केनचित् अनिकेतस्थिरमतिः भक्तिमान् मे प्रियो नरः। ये तु धर्म्यामृतमिदम् यथोक्तम् पर्युपासते श्रद्धाना मत्परमाः भक्तास्तेतीव मे प्रियाः। ॐ तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायाम् योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे भक्तियोगो नाम द्वादशोऽध्यायः। अथ द्वादशोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवम् सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वाम् पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषाम् के योगवित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः। क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते। ये तु सर्वाणि कर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन माम् ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहम् समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम् मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिम् निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वम् न संशयः अत चित्तम् समाधातुम् न शक्नोषि मयि स्थिरम् अभ्यासयोगेन ततः मामिच्छाप्तुम् धनञ्जय अभ्यासेऽप्यसमर्थोऽसि मत्कर्म परमो भव मदर्थमपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिमवाप्स्यसि अथैतदप्यशक्तोऽसि कर्तुम् मद्योगमाश्रितः सर्वकर्मफलत्यागम् ततः कुरु यदात्मवान् श्रेयो हि ज्ञानमभ्यासात् ज्ञानाद्ध्यानम् विशिष्यते ध्यानात् कर्मफलत्यागः त्यागाच्छान्तिरनन्तरम् अद्वेष्टा सर्वभूतानाम् मैत्रः करुण एव च निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः समदुःखसुखः क्षमी सन्तुष्टः सततम् योगी यतात्मा दृढनिश्चयः मय्यर्पितमनो बुद्धिः यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यस्मान्नो द्विजते लोकः लोकान्नो द्विजते च यः हर्षामर्षभयोद्वेगैः मुक्तो यः स च मे प्रियः अनपेक्षः शुचिर्दक्षः उदासीनो गतव्यथः सर्वारम्भपरित्यागी यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यो न हृष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न काङ्क्षति शुभाशुभपरित्यागी भक्तिमान्यः स मे प्रियः समः शत्रौ च मित्रे च तथा मानापमानयोः शीतोष्णसुखदुःखेषु समः सङ्गविवर्जितः तुल्यनिन्दास्तुतिर्मौनी सन्तुष्टो येन केनचित् अनिकेतस्थिरमतिः भक्तिमान् मे प्रियो नरः ये तु धर्म्यामृतमिदम् यथोक्तम् पर्युपासते श्रद्दधाना मत्परमाः भक्तास्तेतीव मे प्रियाः ॐ तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायाम् योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे भक्तियोगो नाम 12ोऽध्यायः। अथ 12ोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवम् सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वाम् पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषाम् के योगवित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः। क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते। ये तु सर्वाणि कर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन माम् ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहम् समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम् मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिम् निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वम् न संशयः अत चित्तम् समाधातुम् न शक्नोषि मयि स्थिरम् अभ्यासयोगेन ततः मामिच्छाप्तुम् धनञ्जय अभ्यासेऽप्यसमर्थोऽसि मत्कर्म परमो भव मदर्थमपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिमवाप्स्यसि अथैतदप्यशक्तोऽसि कर्तुम् मद्योगमाश्रितः सर्वकर्मफलत्यागम् ततः कुरु यदात्मवान् श्रेयो हि ज्ञानमभ्यासात् ज्ञानाद्ध्यानम् विशिष्यते ध्यानात् कर्मफलत्यागः त्यागाच्छान्तिरनन्तरम् अद्वेष्टा सर्वभूतानां मैत्रः करुण एव च निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः समदुःखसुखः क्षमी सन्तुष्टः सततं योगी यतात्मा दृढनिश्चयः मय्यर्पितमनो बुद्धिः यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यस्मान्नो द्विजते लोकः लोकान्नो द्विजते च यः हर्षामर्षभयोद्वेगैः मुक्तो यः स च मे प्रियः अनपेक्षः शुचिर्दक्षः उदासीनो गतव्यथः सर्वारम्भपरित्यागी यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यो न हृष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न काङ्क्षति शुभाशुभपरित्यागी भक्तिमान्यः स मे प्रियः समशत्रौ च मित्रे च तथा मानापमानयोः शीतोष्णसुखदुःखेषु समः सङ्गविवर्जितः तुल्यनिन्दास्तुतिर्मौनी सन्तुष्टो येन केनचित् अनिकेतस्थिरमतिः भक्तिमान् मे प्रियो नरः ये तु धर्म्यामृतमिदम् यथोक्तम् पर्युपासते श्रद्धानामत्परमाः भक्तास्तेतीव मे प्रियाः ॐ तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायाम् योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे भक्तियोगो नाम 12ोऽध्यायः। अथ 12ोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवं सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वाम् पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषाम् के योगवित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः। क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते। ये तु सर्वाणि कर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन माम् ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहम् समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम् मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिम् निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वम् न संशयः अत चित्तम् समाधातुम् न शक्नोषि।
ॐ पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिः चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhaved. Sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayate Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. In our last reflection, we were reflecting on the cosmic form that Krishna showed to Arjuna. Up to this point in the teaching, we find that there has literally been a feast of ideas. There's been discussion about the Atman, and there's karma, there is jnana, there is reference to the Supreme Spirit, sometimes spoken of in very personal terms, sometimes in very impersonal terms. And we see that every question that Arjuna asks, starting with chapter 3 of the Gita, is just weighing these different ideas that Krishna has presented. It's a little bit like, although this example might be a little bit crude, it's like going when you go to a mall or when you go to buy something, and then you have 10 or 15 different varieties of things. And obviously, when we go shopping, we want to buy something that is really good, something that is valuable, something that is of good quality. Here it's not exactly in the same way, but somewhat similar. Here is this feast of ideas that Krishna is presenting before Arjuna. And some of these ideas that are presented seem to call for a choice. When Krishna spoke about the path of karma and the path of jnana in the second chapter, for instance, it seems like there is a choice whether I could either choose this or I could choose that. Which is why the beginning of the third chapter, Arjuna asks Krishna, which of these is better? Which of these is greater? Which is because obviously I would like to take that path which is better, that path which is greater, that path which is superior. And so we see the discussion about the relative importance or the superiority between jnana and karma discussed earlier. Now here, Arjuna's question is related to just the nature of the divine being. Because up to this point, whenever Krishna has referred to the transcendent reality, it is sometimes in very impersonal ways. When he speaks about the Atman, that which is birthless, deathless, that which weapons cannot cut, that which water cannot wet. Very impersonal. On the other hand, both the vision that Arjuna just had of the cosmic form, that was very personal. There was this, yes, not exactly a human figure, but a human-like figure, but huge, of cosmic proportions with innumerable hands and mouths and terrifying as it was, but it was still a kind of a personal figure. And then Krishna has also spoken about the divine being in very personal terms. And so Arjuna's question here is logical. He says, so which of these two aspects of the divine are better? Which of the people who worship the impersonal, are they better, or the people who worship the personal form of the divine, are they better? Now you might remember that this was also one of the favorite questions of Sri Ramakrishna. Many of the people who visited him, this was a question they often faced from Ramakrishna. He would say, do you believe in God with form or without form? Or do you believe in Sanskrit, the word they used is sakara or nirakara. Akara is form. Sakara means with form. Nirakara, so nir prefix akara means without form. So that was one of the questions Sri Ramakrishna used to ask. Do you believe in God with form or without form? Or do you believe in God with qualities or God beyond qualities? Now, these kind of questions seem to give us an impression that we have a choice whether I should worship this aspect of the divine or the other aspect of the divine. And so Arjuna's question here, in the beginning of chapter 12, is which worship is superior? Which worship is better? Now, when we speak about worship, we usually, the idea is it is associated with bhakti. That is why chapter 12 is called Bhakti Yoga. Now, although every chapter of the Gita is called some yoga or the other, by and large, all spiritual practices, Swami Vivekananda categorized into 4 categories. And Bhakti Yoga is one of those 4 categories. These categories are not based so much on the different practices involved, but which function of the mind is involved in those practices. The mind, just to summarize what we have seen on many earlier occasions, the mind has primarily 3 different functions. One function of the mind is cognitive, that part of the mind which uses reason and logic, the rational part of the mind. So, any spiritual practice, again, not spiritual practices just limited to Vedanta, but any spiritual practice from any religious tradition, across religions, across the different points in history, whichever we can characterize as spiritual practice. Now, if in that practice, the predominant power of the mind, the power of reasoning, the power of logic, if that is the power that is used, if it is that cognitive function of the mind that is primarily being employed in that practice, then those kind of practices will come under Jnana Yoga. The mind has another function, and that is called the affective function. An affective function is where the mind uses and employs the power of feelings and the power of emotions. So every spiritual practice where the predominantly the power of feelings and emotions is employed, the word predominantly is important because we cannot just make these artificial compartments in the mind as if to say, or reasoning has nothing to do with feeling and so on. So predominantly means that is the major part of the practice. So feelings and emotions, when they are used predominantly, then those practices are called bhakti yoga. That means that there is a scope for reasoning and logic in the path of bhakti as well. There is a scope for the power of the will as well. But they may not be predominant the way the power of emotions is. And the third function of the mind is the power of the willpower. Now, when that willpower is used in the external world through the work that we do, then all those practices are called karma yoga. And when the same power of the will is employed in the internal world to harness the power of the mind internally, then those practices come under Raj Yoga. And that's how all spiritual practices, it is easy to classify them under one of these four yogas. So Bhakti Yoga are practices which predominantly employ the power of feelings and emotions. So Arjuna's question here is, where should these feelings and emotions be directed? Should I direct them toward an ideal which is very personal, sakara and saguna, that which is form, that which has qualities, toward a divine being who we see as loving, kind, all the personal attributes that are often employed to God? Or should my power of feelings and emotion be directed toward this impersonal ideal, where we don't so much speak about love and kindness and so on, we just speak about an impersonal ideal that is birthless and deathless and so on. So that is the question. And which of these is superior? And in the second verse, let me read that verse. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Mayyaveshya mano ye mam nitya yukta upasate shraddhaya parayopetaha te me yuktatama mataha. So Krishna's answer is very clear. He said that those who worship me in the personal form, they are better. Now it might seem as if it's a very straightforward, unambiguous answer. But not so much. Because if you then look at verses 3 and 4, he's saying, but those who worship this impersonal aspect, they too will come to me. So, both, in other words, what he's saying is, no matter which aspect of the divine you worship, no matter which spiritual ideal you are drawn to, personal or impersonal, ultimately you're going to come to the same one reality. Because the reality is not different. There is not one personal God and a different impersonal God. They are just two readings, two perceptions, two views of the one reality. To some, that same reality might come or appear in very personal terms. To others, the same reality will appear in very impersonal terms. So no matter what you hold on to, since the reality is one, we are all ultimately going toward the same reality. So then what was the point in saying that those who approach his preference, Krishna's preference for those who approach the divine in personal terms? And the reason he describes in verse 5. Take a look at it. Klesho adhikataras tesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukkham deha vadbhir avapyate. Greater is their trouble whose minds are set on the unmanifested, that is the impersonal. For the goal of the unmanifested is very hard for the embodied to reach. So that's the only reason why Krishna shows preference for the personal than the impersonal. Not because one works and the other doesn't. Both are efficient methods, efficient ways, efficient paths of reaching the divine. But the path of the impersonal is more difficult, is more tough than the other one. Now we might pause here and ask, why is it more tough? In popular readings of spiritual texts, people sometimes come away with the impression that the impersonal, that which is beyond form, beyond qualities, is somehow superior than that which is personal. Because the personal kind of seems as if it is limited by name, limited by form, while the others seem unlimited. But that's an illusion. The idea is, even when we think of the formless, as long as it is still an object of our thought, it is also very limited. So there is no need to imagine that one is superior and the other is not. Once Sri Ramakrishna was asked that question, is God with form or without form? And that was also the question Sri Ramakrishna used to ask the devotees who came to him. And Sri Ramakrishna's answer was not simply that God can be with form and without form, but then the phrase that he adds afterwards, God is with form, without form, and so much more besides. That's the important phrase. That is, we should not think that we encompass the totality of divine being in just categorizing them with form or without form. The idea is, as long as the notion or the idea of form remains in the mind, the idea of formless also remains. This is all thinking of the mind is occurring in this polarized existence. So if I think of the form is understood only in contrast with the formless. And I think of the formless is understood only as distinguished from form. So you cannot separate the idea of the form from the formless because they are kind of linked, being two poles of the idea related to form. The reality itself is not just beyond form and beyond the formless, but even beyond the idea of the form, beyond the idea of the formless, and beyond the distinction between the two. And so that is what Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said that God is with form, without form, and so much more besides. Now, why should worshipping God or meditating on God without form, why should it be more difficult? And the reason is, there is a principle involved in worship. It's called Devo Bhutva Devam Yajet. That is, in order to worship the divine, we have to become divine in some way. Only then is that communication with the divine possible. And that is why whenever any ritualistic worship is done, the first part of the worship, even before the main worship of the deity begins, the first part is really several small rituals involving divinizing everything around us. So first of all, and if you look at the worship manuals, it just goes with different shuddhis, pushpa shuddhi, mantra shuddhi, um, or let me just kind of give you a brief idea about how it all works. So, first of all, they do what they call an achmana. Achmana is you take some water, Ganges water, sip it, utter some mantras. The idea is that if I'm going, while doing worship, I'm going to utter all these sacred mantras, then the tongue and the mouth from which these mantras are going to be uttered, they must be purified. So it's a purification process. Purification, washing of hands. Before the bath, the worshipper is expected to take a shower, wear washed clothes. Then ritually, the area where the worship is being done, that whole area is divinized, is purified. There are different mantras to do that. Then the flowers that are being offered, those flowers are purified. All the puja vessels that are used for worship, they are purified. Everything connected with the worship is purified. And then only the puja can begin. The idea is, since we are the object of our worship, the divine being is embodiment of purity. Everything, as much as it is possible for us humanly to do, we must try to purify everything connected with that worship, including the worshipper. Since we are going to worship the divine, everything connected with the worship must be divinized as well. Only then the actual worship begins. That is why Devo Bhutva, becoming divine, becoming sacred, Devam Yajed. You can worship the sacred, worship the divine, worship the holy. So, in order for us to be able to worship the impersonal or to meditate on the impersonal, we have to become impersonal ourselves. And that is not easy. Right now, we don't have to struggle at all to be personal. Why is it easy? Because I am a person. I don't have to look inside a book to find whether I'm a person or not. That is, our personhood is firm in the mind. We have no doubt. Yes, right now I think of myself as a human being. But there is this being, and this being has a form, has qualities. So I understand the language of form. I understand the language of qualities. I understand what it means to be loving, kind. When I see a loving person, a kind person, an unselfish person, through the way they talk, the way the work they do, I'm able to understand it, appreciate it, and be inspired by it. Now, because the form, the personhood, the qualities are something I'm familiar with, I'm dealing with these in my daily life. Of course, in a very limited way, because I'm a human being, I'm looking at other human beings, and I'm seeing all these things, but in a very limited scale. Now, if I can project these limited entities that I'm already familiar with, it is easier then for me to think of the divine in some form. Because forms is a language that I understand. Now, that form can be anthropomorphic or non-anthropomorphic. That form can be a human form, as many of the deities tend to be, or it could be a symbol. So the two words in Sanskrit are called pratika for a symbol, for a non-anthropomorphic form, or a pratima means a anthropomorphic form, a form that we can recognize from our human term, in the human terms. So Our mind understands the language of form, and therefore it is easier to think of the divine in some form. Our mind understands the language of attributes or qualities, and therefore it is easier for us to think or visualize or adore God as a loving being. Otherwise, God as a loving being would have been a totally foreign concept if we had not had some experience of love in our life. We have people in our lives where we have seen there is such a thing as a love. We know what a loving person means. Now, if I can see that what little, maybe the love that we might get from a human being may still be very limited, but at least I know what it means to be a loving being. Now, if I can multiply that 1,000,000,000 times, that God is this infinite being, my mind thinks of that God in some form and filled with love. Gazillion times more than the love I have seen in my daily life. I have some idea of purity because I've seen it in the people around me. Now, if I can multiply that a gazillion times and saying God is like infinitely more pure than that. So all of these very auspicious qualities, as we call them, or qualities that we adore, qualities that we know are worthy of cultivating in our own lives. All of those good qualities we see filled the God, the divine being filled with those qualities. That is so much more easier to do than to think of a neutral being without any qualities, without any form. It's not impossible, but it's difficult, very difficult. And that is the only reason why Krishna says that no matter which aspect of the divine you worship, you will come to the same being, but it is easier to do so if you begin your spiritual journey with something familiar. Because the journey is often from what is familiar to what is not so familiar. It's like this, when we start traveling to a place we have never been to before. Then clearly we are going to an unfamiliar place. We don't know anything about that place. But my starting point where I am now, I'm familiar with that. So when I start driving, at least as long as I'm in the city I am, as long as I'm driving, some of those streets are familiar and I just feel comfortable. Then as I start going out and reaching areas I've never been before, then I will begin to see something new. So similarly in spiritual life, for most of us, our journey is from form to the formless. A form with which we are familiar. And Ishta really means a form which we are drawn to naturally. A form that speaks to our heart, speaks to our head. A form that resonates with us. A form that naturally elicits love, adoration, devotion from our heart. So that form, the journey then takes us to the formless. From the name, the mantra that we chant, it is a sound. So the journey is from sound to beyond sound. With the help of words, we start going beyond words. So it's a journey from the familiar to the unfamiliar. And it's always helpful. We start with what is familiar, and gradually, as we become stronger, we are able to deal with the unfamiliar in a better way. So that's the only reason. So the first part of chapter 12 is really this discussion about which kind of a ideal should I strive for? And Krishna's answer is choose an ideal that comes naturally to you. Now, one important point is this. We might think that I am choosing the ideal, which probably may not be the correct way of thinking. What we will discover, if not immediately, sometime or other in our life, that even though in the beginning we might think that I have made the choice, devotees realize that it's actually the ideal that chose them. So we don't choose something, the ideal chooses. It's a little bit like, think about it this way. Let's say you go to buy a pair of shoes. And usually when we go to a shop to buy, well, nowadays, because of COVID, many people are just buying things online. So if you're doing it online, or actually, if you do manage to go to a shop, usually we have a bunch of options before us. We know we want shoes, what kind of shoes, and so on. And so we have these 5 or 6, 7 different varieties, let's say, at least in front. And then we look at whatever criteria we have in mind, and then we say, this is the pair I'm going to choose. Now, superficially, it does look as if I have made the choice. I had all these options and I chose that. But maybe not. The reason is, maybe I could not have chosen any other pair than the one that I chose. I had no option. And no option because, let us see, for instance, I already had a certain idea that, let's say, brown shoes really look good on me, or I really love brown. So maybe I have a preference for brown shoes. So I could not have chosen then any other color other than brown because I really love brown color. Now, I means not I. So I'm just giving an example. But brown color is good though. And then a certain style of shoes. Maybe I have preference for a certain style of shoes. And then I could not have chosen any other style because I loved a particular style. So if you kind of go on narrowing down my own personal likes, eventually you will find no matter, even if they had put 100 pairs before me, I would have just chosen this one. So my preferences, pre-existing preferences, already had made the choice for me, while giving me the delusion that I was the one who chose it. Now, when we have an ishta in spiritual life, oftentimes in the beginning we might think that I have made that choice. I have chosen it. But we realize, usually sooner, but sometimes later, that no, the choice was not made by me. And that's why oftentimes in the tradition, we say, well, let me leave the choice to the Guru. The Guru knows what is best for me. So either way, it's not a matter of personal choice. So when we have that ideal which speaks to us, it's through that ideal. For many of us, it begins as if it is a personal ideal. But that personal ideal itself functions. Ramakrishna gives this example of a window. He uses actually he calls it a hole inside a wall. Actually, a window is kind of a hole inside a wall. We don't think about it as a hole because it's kind of nicely good shape and it has all the everything. So we just call it a window, but that's essentially what it is. So either way, you think about it as a hole in the wall or you think about it as a window. A window, oftentimes, or a hole has a specific shape, and it's limited in size. But through the window, I can see a much larger area. The window here, where I am sitting now, which is facing the River Charles, the river is huge. But through the window, I just have to go. I don't even have to go too much near the window. Looking at it, I see a vast expanse. I see Cambridge on the other side. I see the rivers. I see people jogging. Much, much bigger than the size of the window itself. That is how the form leads me to the formless. My Ishta, my chosen deity, becomes the window. And in and through my Ishta, I have this entry into this vast expanse of the spiritual world. That is how we go from form to beyond form. An adjective Swami Vivekananda uses to describe Ramakrishna, the Swami Vivekananda's composition called Khandana Bhavabandhana, what we sing now as the Vesper hymns in all the centers of the Vedanta Society, the world over. It's a hymn addressed to Ramakrishna. And one of the adjectives in that hymn, it's called Chit Ghana Kai. The hymn itself is in Bengali, but it's very Sanskritized. Every word is, mostly, every little word can be traced back to a Sanskrit source. So Chit is consciousness, Ghana is concentrated, Kaya is the body. So it's possible to those who saw Sri Ramakrishna in person before 1886, they saw a human being. Many of them just saw him as a human being, that's it. Some saw him as a great soul, but nevertheless, still in a human body. There were times when a few of his disciples had visions. Even in Ramakrishna, they saw a different deities. But the vision didn't last forever. Again, he came back into that human form. Now, after his Mahasamadhi, after his passing, we are lucky in some ways that Ramakrishna's form still remains because of technology. Well, because of photographs available now, we don't have to so much just imagine or speculate or depend on descriptions of his contemporaries to know how he looked. We don't have too many photographs, but whatever photographs we have, it's easier for us to visualize how he looked. In meditation, when we visualize that form, what Swami Vivekananda says is that form can be seen not merely as a form of flesh and blood, which it is in human terms, but it's more than that. And he says, Chit Ghana Kai, that is purely consciousness. If consciousness were to be concentrated so that it will become more tangible, then that would be the form it would take. Now, this is true not just for Ramakrishna, that those who worship Krishna or Rama or Jesus, whichever, or the Buddha, whichever, or Ganesha or Shiva or Vishnu or Durga or Kali, any of these deities, it's possible to see them in human terms, but it is also possible to see all of these divine forms as consciousness which has been tightly packed inside that adorable form. And we know that the form itself is very fragile. Once our mind gets concentrated and we have this kind of a connection established, and this happens in deep meditation, then we see very quickly that form begins to melt away. And then we see, that's what I meant by through the window, you get to an expansive view of what is beyond that. You might also remember Ramakrishna's example of how water when it freezes will become into ice. Now, ice has a certain form. Whether there are ice cubes or whatever the container the water gets frozen in, that ice will take the form of that container. But water itself, when ice melts, if the water is simply flowing, it's just flowing. But if it is, again, the water is inside a container, the water also will seem to have a certain form. But when you boil that water and the vapor comes out, it's just everywhere. The vapor has no specific form. So that's how this binary that is created between form and formlessness is eliminated through that example. That even though seemingly the object of our meditation may have a form, that form is not so tightly held. Now, that's true with our form as well, theoretically. You see, now this form that every one of us has, the form that the body has given us, that form keeps on changing, clearly. The form was very tiny when we were born, then the form became bigger and bigger and bigger, and of course, when the body dies, again, then it's a subtle body within, which also has a form, because it's still a body. We don't know what that form is because we can't see it, but it's subtle. And then, of course, we have this idea of rebirth. It will take different forms. Now, the reason that your and my form seems to continue birth after birth after birth, it's because I don't want to let go of the form. My sense of I desperately clings to this form of the body and mind. It doesn't want to let it go. And as long as I hold on, cling to this body and mind as me, I have to live within a form. And a form brings a limitation. I have to live within the limitations of the form that I have. Now, if this clinging, this I, holding on to the body and mind, become weaker and weaker, the more my I says, I'm not this, I don't want to identify with these limited things, then this will begin to also melt the way a divine form melts into this infinite consciousness. Because that same consciousness is within me too. The Atman is nothing but consciousness. But that consciousness seems covered now by the body, mind, intellect, because my ego, my I, doesn't want to let go of the form. Now, in the case of the divine being, in the case of my Ishta, that I is totally absent. That's gone. And so their form is very fragile, if you like. It's there, and that's why a bhakta, a devotee says, God has kept that form for my sake, for my benefit. God has nothing to gain by that form. But because it will be difficult for me to visualize, to pray, to meditate on this infinite being, because I am a finite being, out of love for me, God keeps this form, this adorable form. But the more I start becoming impersonal myself, the more my ego, the ego's hold on the body and mind, the more that starts disappearing, then the form of my Ishta also starts disappearing. In other words, the more impersonal I get, the more impersonal does my Ishta become. So there is this direct relationship between the devotee and the divine whom the devotee worships. There is a direct relationship when the one who is doing the worship and the one who is receiving the worship. There is a direct relationship on the one who is meditating and the object of meditation. That is what I said in the beginning, Devo Bhutva Devam Yajet, that the two have to be in the same, I don't have the right word for it, in the same plane, if you like, in order for any kind of a communication to become possible. As long as I'm a person, I can communicate with, pray to, worship and meditate a God who is personal in some way. Not necessarily always with form, but definitely with qualities, at least. But the more impersonal I get, my divine being also becomes impersonal. And so, as I evolve, the object of my worship, the object of my meditation, the object of my adoration also evolves. The divine being is one, the divine being doesn't change, but my understanding of the divine changes as I change. So that's an important point to remember for all of us who are in spiritual life. That, just quickly summarize what we have seen today, is that no matter how we look upon God, in personal terms or impersonal terms, that is fine, that we will ultimately go to that same reality because God is not many. It's the same God who appears as personal and impersonal. Second thing, it might seem as if we choose that ideal, but reality, it is the ideal that chooses us. So whichever ideal we have, whichever ideal has come to us, either through the grace of God, through the grace of our Guru, that's the path for us. And if I hold on to that with sincerity, with regularity, with faith, with devotion, with Shraddha, that path will open out this infinite reality before us. If the path before me, as I begin my journey, is a path of the personal, then the divine being becomes like the window. As I go closer and closer to the window, more and more of the infinite reality is revealed to me. So that is how this chapter on bhakti begins. When we meet next week, we will see the kind of qualities that are necessary in order to develop our devotion, develop our bhakti in our own life. So we'll take a 5-minute break now. And if you have any questions and thoughts and ideas, we can discuss them after the break. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu.
अथ द्वादशोऽध्यायः अर्जुन उवाच एवं सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वां पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तं तेषां के योगवित्तमाः श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये मां नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तं पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलं ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते ये तु सर्वाणि कर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन माम् ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहम् समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम् मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिम् निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वम् न संशयः अत चित्तम् समाधातुम् न शक्नोषि मयि स्थिरम् अभ्यासयोगेन ततः मामिच्छाप्तुम् धनञ्जय अभ्यासेऽप्यसमर्थोऽसि मत्कर्म परमो भव मदर्थमपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिमवाप्स्यसि अथैतदप्यशक्तोऽसि कर्तुम् मद्योगमाश्रितः सर्वकर्मफलत्यागम् ततः कुरु यदात्मवान् श्रेयो हि ज्ञानमभ्यासात् ज्ञानाद्ध्यानम् विशिष्यते ध्यानात् कर्मफलत्यागः त्यागाच्छान्तिरनन्तरम् अद्वेष्टा सर्वभूतानाम् मैत्रः करुण एव च निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः समदुःखसुखः क्षमी सन्तुष्टः सततम् योगी यतात्मा दृढनिश्चयः मय्यर्पितमनो बुद्धिः यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यस्मान्नो द्विजते लोकः लोकान्नो द्विजते च यः हर्षामर्षभयोद्वेगैः मुक्तो यः स च मे प्रियः अनपेक्षः शुचिर्दक्षः उदासीनो गतव्यथः सर्वारम्भपरित्यागी यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यो न हृष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न काङ्क्षति शुभाशुभपरित्यागी भक्तिमान्यः स मे प्रियः समः शत्रौ च मित्रे च तथा मानापमानयोः शीतोष्णसुखदुःखेषु समः सङ्गविवर्जितः तुल्यनिन्दास्तुतिर्मौनी सन्तुष्टो येन केनचित् अनिकेतस्थिरमतिः भक्तिमान् मे प्रियो नरः ये तु धर्म्यामृतमिदम् यथोक्तम् पर्युपासते श्रद्दधाना मत्परमाः भक्तास्तेतीव मे प्रियाः ॐ तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायाम् योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे भक्तियोगो नाम 12ोऽध्यायः। अथ 12ोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवम् सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वाम् पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषाम् के योगमित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति मामेव सर्वभूतहिते रताः। क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्तचेतसाम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहवद्भिरवाप्यते ये तु सर्वाणि कर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्पराः अनन्येनैव योगेन माम् ध्यायन्त उपासते तेषामहम् समुद्धर्ता मृत्युसंसारसागरात् भवामि न चिरात् पार्थ मय्यावेशितचेतसाम् मय्येव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिम् निवेशय निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अत ऊर्ध्वम् न संशयः अत चित्तम् समाधातुम् न शक्नोषि मयि स्थिरम् अभ्यासयोगेन ततः मामिच्छाप्तुम् धनञ्जय अभ्यासेऽप्यसमर्थोऽसि मत्कर्म परमो भव मदर्थमपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिमवाप्स्यसि अथैतदप्यशक्तोऽसि कर्तुम् मद्योगमाश्रितः सर्वकर्मफलत्यागम् ततः कुरु यदात्मवान् श्रेयो हि ज्ञानमभ्यासात् ज्ञानाध्यानम् विशिष्यते ध्यानात् कर्मफलत्यागः त्यागाच्छान्तिरनन्तरम् अद्वेष्टा सर्वभूतानाम् मैत्रः करुण एव च निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः समदुःखसुखः क्षमी सन्तुष्टः सततम् योगी यतात्मा दृढनिश्चयः मय्यर्पितमनो बुद्धिः यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यस्मान्नो द्विजते लोकः लोकान्नो द्विजते च यः हर्षामर्षभयोद्वेगैः मुक्तो यः स च मे प्रियः अनपेक्षः शुचिर्दक्षः उदासीनो गतव्यथः सर्वारम्भपरित्यागी यो मद्भक्तः स मे प्रियः यो न हृष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न काङ्क्षति शुभाशुभपरित्यागी भक्तिमान्यः स मे प्रियः समः शत्रौ च मित्रे च तथा मानापमानयोः शीतोष्णसुखदुःखेषु समः सङ्गविवर्जितः तुल्यनिन्दास्तुतिर्मौनी सन्तुष्टो येन केनचित् अनिकेतस्थिरमतिः भक्तिमान् मे प्रियो नरः ये तु धर्म्यामृतमिदम् यथोक्तम् पर्युपासते श्रद्धाना मत्परमाः भक्तास्तेतीव मे प्रियाः ॐ तत्सत् इति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायाम् योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे भक्तियोगो नाम 12ोऽध्यायः। अथ 12ोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवं सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वाम् पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषाम् के योगवित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्ये।
Let's take a look at the questions. First one, would it be hyperbole to then suggest that one can possibly see the shadow of that Chitghanakai in all living beings? Not necessarily hyperbole. It is a spiritual practice to try to see the presence of God in all. And it does help. So, just as the divine I worship the quality of my meditation depends on how I'm able to relate to that divine being. It's easier for me to think of the divine as filled with consciousness if I'm able to feel some amount of presence of consciousness in my own heart, the divine consciousness. So similarly, if I remember that Chitghanakai, that divine consciousness is in my heart, it is easier then for me to see that divine consciousness present in the hearts of the people around me or the person in front of me. So the same principle holds. If I think of myself as a child of God, it is easier for me to see others as children of God. If I see the presence of God in my heart, it is easier for me to feel the presence of God in the heart of the person in front of me as well. Next, My sense of I won't let go of my body and mind until it sees the limitations of form. What in life will show me the obvious limitations of form? The obvious limitations of form are clearly, well, in a very simple way, of course, the form limits me. Right now, I am sitting here. If I want to now go someplace else, I'll have to get up and go and walk or take the train or take a car. So I cannot be in any place I want at the moment I want it. For instance, right now, if someone says, "Oh, I would like to visit India," and then say, "No, you can't. There is COVID restrictions. You have to buy a ticket. Tickets may not be available. There may be fewer flights. You may have to have a COVID test." Now, if you didn't have a form, you could be wherever you want to be. I mean, it's like the mind. The mind doesn't have the kind of form the body has. So my mind can go to India right now without any COVID restrictions. But the form of the body limits me here. That's one of the several examples we can think of. But the other thing is the presence of the form. Although we are never without form until we become enlightened, but the form is also changeable. Form involves change. And so if I have this form of the body itself is going to be destroyed. That's what death means. That's a limitation. I would like now for this form to remain for the next 1,000 years. It doesn't. It can't. And so these are some of the obvious limitations that come to mind immediately. But if we think about it more, we will see. When I look at the birds, I would like to fly, but this form as a human being, I cannot fly. The form of the bird can fly, but the bird says, "I would like to go and study the Gita." Well, at least the bird is not going to be able to study the Gita with the way you and I are doing, unless they have their own Gita satsang going on the trees somewhere, which is possible, but we have no way of knowing that. Next, referring to the purchase of shoes, that we are not making the choice ourselves, how does this affect the concept of free will? That's a big subject. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of a cow which is tied to a pole. So it's tied with a rope to a pole. And the rope maybe 10 feet long. So the cow does have some freedom. The cow can walk around a 10-foot radius, because as far as the rope will allow that cow to go. But that freedom is limited. It's not like the cow cannot go anywhere because the cow is still tied. So our free will is a little bit like that. So our freedom, we do have freedom, but it's a limited freedom. And it's tied up with the earlier question. For instance, I have a freedom to go wherever I want, but that freedom is limited by the limitations of the form. I don't have freedom to fly. The force of gravity will not allow me to fly. So free will is, in some sense, from philosophically, free will is a misnomer. Because will, as a function of the mind, the moment you have come to the level of the mind, already some bondage itself has come in. And so will is therefore never free in the ultimate sense. But yes, in a day-to-day activities, the will does give us an illusion of freedom. And that freedom is essential, because if that idea of freedom were not there, we wouldn't take any responsibility for our actions. And that's often the questions we find people asking. If everything happens through God's will, then I'm not responsible for what I do. And because God probably wants us to be responsible for our actions, we have this feeling that I have some freedom, that I made the choice that I did out of freedom, and therefore I'm responsible for the choices I make in life. And so that's the kind of a world in which we live. There is the idea of freedom. If you look at it from one's angle, look at it from a different angle, we say, no, we are just bound. If we look at it from one angle, we feel, yes, I'm able to do what I want. If you look at it from a different angle, it looks like now everything happens through God's will. Only what God wants will happen. Now, you put these two things together, they don't seem logical at all. They just seem, in fact, contradictory. But that's the kind of world in which we live. We will never have definitive answers because it is just filled with contradictions. And these contradictions in life are a part of Maya. This is what Maya is. Maya itself, the Vedanta texts say, you cannot say Maya exists, you cannot say it doesn't exist. So therefore they say Maya is, the Sanskrit word is anirvachaniya, inexpressible. It's not existence, it is not non-existence. The more we start looking at our human situation, we will be amazed to see how it's just filled with contradictions. Our human mind likes to see order. I mean, all the laws that we see around it, the law of gravitation and this law and that law, and the more laws that are then made, all the laws are made to kind of bring some amount of order into our universe. But as we kind of step back and look at it really objectively, we see just filled with contradictions. In fact, at some point, they even begin to question whether there is such a thing as causation. Even the connection between cause and effect may be our own a human construct. Again, not clear right away. Superficially, we just see that everything is very ordered. And that was, I think to some extent, we'll see that the classical physics of Newton, which was like very ordered. Everything happened like with clockwork precision. And then we come to the quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and the principle of uncertainty. And then that perfect order somehow seems to be not so orderly at all. We see that there is this chaos in the world. And there is, in fact, a chaos theory. I don't know what it is. Seems it's pretty complicated. But at least from a non-specialist point of view, that they use the word chaos to describe it shows that there is probably not so much the kind of order that Newton's physics presented before us. So these are big subjects, but I think worth reflecting on. Next, our choice of spiritual practice is based on our mental tendencies, which we are born with. Is that what is meant by we don't choose, but the form chooses us? Yes, that could be one way of looking at it, certainly. That the inborn likes and dislikes, the inborn biases we have for or against things, that almost predetermines our choices. Unless we begin to think outside the box, so to speak. But that's very difficult. But it's not impossible. Again, it's possible to do it, to make a choice which is completely apparently uncharacteristic of ourselves. But that very rarely happens. In fact, the Zen practice, one of the schools of Zen, is really when they speak about the koan, is to find an answer to a question. And the question itself is often very simple. But the trick is to find an irrational answer to that question. And that's tough. You see, whenever a question is asked, we naturally start thinking about it logically. Most of us. Because that's the way the mind is programmed to think. Now, to think illogically is more difficult than to think logically. If you are asked to write a sentence in English, for instance, most of us would be able to do it effortlessly. But if we are told now to write a sentence with every word must be wrongly spelt, that will take longer time to write the sentence than to write, unless your spelling itself is bad. That's different. But if your spellings are good, then if someone tells you write a paragraph with every word misspelled, it'll take longer time to do that. And so, yes. So to answer your question, yes, it is the pre-existing likes and dislikes within which most of us live and most of us decide and make choices in our life. That is what chooses things for us. Next. Through regular practice, feel that bhakti is an essential ingredient for Jnana Yoga. Isn't Thakur all about love for Ma Kali? Is a Vijnani love all as God's projection? Well, I don't want to go into all these technical terms because there are lots has been written about Vijnana and so on. Now, when you say bhakti is an ingredient, essential ingredient of Jnana Yoga, I don't think this is a very helpful way to put it. I think what I have found it helpful is that any practice, if it predominantly uses the power of emotions, it will be bhakti. If it predominantly uses the power of reasoning, it will be under Jnana Yoga. That way of classification is much easier. If we want to think about bhakti in the path of jnana, that bhakti will get defined slightly differently. In fact, Shankaracharya does use the word bhakti in his Viveka Chudamani. He says, bhakti is swaswarupa anusandhanam. What is bhakti? It is a single-minded exploration of one's true nature. So you see, the word bhakti is used, but it is expressed in what we might say very jnana terms. And so let's not get kind of caught up in the word bhakti or jnana. Better to kind of look at it from the function of the mind that is predominant in any practice. Next, so the mantra given to us by the Guru is how the name of our Ishta has been given or chosen for us. Yes, that is what is seen in the tradition, that when a Guru chooses a mantra or a Ishta for us, that choice has come through the Guru, but through the will of God, through the grace of our Ishta. And so that is why, that's another way of seeing how it's the choice that is not really made by us. It's sometimes some people have noticed in their lives that when they received an Ishta or a mantra from the Guru, immediately not everyone was able to feel that sense of connection or feel that, oh, that was my Ishta. But once they started the practice, they discovered that that was exactly how it is. So sometimes we might have a certain choice ourselves, but that may not be our ishta. So that's why it's often left to the guru to decide what's best for the disciple. Next, when Swami Vivekananda classifies the yogas in terms of the faculties of the mind, where does spiritual intuition, dhi, fit? Intuition, dhi, is necessary for no matter what spiritual practice we use, no matter what yoga becomes our primary practice, dhi is essential for anything. So one of the first lessons that the student was given in Vedic times was the teaching of Gayatri and the repetition of the Gayatri mantra. Because irrespective of the specific spiritual practice that we might get from our guru, dhi is essential for all of them. Dhi is just the clarity of the mind, because only when the mind becomes clear, it is able to pursue the spiritual path. So dhi is common to all. Next, typing Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya into a notepad on my computer, isn't that equivalent to chanting? Well, mantra japa is of many different kinds. Usually when people say japa, it is repeating God's name either audibly or in the mind. But there is also a practice of what they say likhita japa, a japa repeating the mantra or God's name in writing, either in longhand, writing with pen and paper. But nowadays, of course, we have computers and we could do that on a computer as well. Except if you're doing it on a computer, copy and paste will not work. Then that would not be equivalent to chanting, because that's too easy. But if I am actually typing it out, the mantra, and while I'm typing it out, if I'm remembering the divine, if I'm doing it as an act of worship, then yes, that can be considered as chanting or considered as japa. Next. So meditation on objects like the ocean or the sky are similar in that they are familiar form of an abstract impersonal. Yes, but it's good to remember that when I say personal or impersonal, it's good to recognize that even when we meditate on the ocean or the ocean or the sky does have a form. Something does come before my mind when I think of the ocean. The something does come before my mind when I think of the sky. Now, an ocean or a sky are good starting points to think of the impersonal. But it's good to recognize that the sky or the ocean are not infinite. They are not really impersonal. They do have a certain form because they do evoke an image before my mind. As long as there is an image before my mind, a familiar image, it is still a personal image. Now, yes, it is not exactly an anthropomorphic human figure, but an image nonetheless. Now, if I can, while I look at the ocean, I look at the sky, if I can not think of the ocean, not think of the sky, but just think of infinity, or if I can immerse my mind in the transcendent aspect, then meditating on the ocean or a sky might help. But as Krishna describes in the beginning of the chapter, or 12th chapter, thinking of the ocean or visualizing the ocean and not thinking of the ocean, or visualizing a sky and not thinking of the sky, That's difficult. It's certainly more difficult than looking or visualizing the Buddha and thinking of the Buddha, or visualizing Ramakrishna and thinking of Ramakrishna, visualizing Jesus and thinking of Jesus is easier than visualizing an ocean and not thinking of the ocean. In fact, not really thinking of anything, because the moment you think of something, the moment it becomes an object of your mind, it has already got personalized in some way. So it's tough. So it's not just about the ocean or the sky, it's about depersonalizing myself. The more I get depersonalized, then maybe it is easier for me to look at the ocean and not think of the ocean. Yes, so again, not impossible, but certainly more challenging. And there's a very interesting comment here that Maya shows up in three modern concepts: Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and Einstein theory of relativity. So those of you with science background will be able to appreciate this very much. So thank you for that comment. And finally, another comment here that you often refer to the Gayatri prayer. Maybe you could teach it to us sometime. I will look it up. Yes, Gayatri prayer, if you just go Google it, you'll find lots and lots of it. If you go to YouTube, you will find many chants that are offered there, or in Spotify. There's plenty. Yeah, there is a lot there. In fact, the problem is not that it's difficult to find. The problem is which among this material that's available on Gayatri would be really helpful to me. So there is really a lot there online. Yes, maybe beginning of next Sunday, we could begin with looking at the Gayatri first. We'll do that next week. So thank you for all these questions, very good questions, and please continue reflecting on these ideas. And next Sunday, we'll first look at Gayatri and then look at the rest of the chapter. And as I said, it's a very important chapter. It's not there are three places in the Gita where the characteristics of the enlightened ones are described. One is we have already seen in the second chapter, where Krishna speaks about Sthita Prajna, a person with steady wisdom. The qualities that are described become the qualities that we as seekers need to develop in our own life. The second instance is here in this chapter, where Krishna speaks about the qualities of an ideal devotee. In fact, the Gita, it is said, such a person is dear to me. And the idea is, if I want to be dear to God, then these are the qualities I must develop. So it's a very straightforward kind of, you can almost make a list. The last time we had studied this chapter in the class here, many of us had made a list looking at this of the kind of qualities I need to develop in my life to be a bhakta. So we will take a look at that next Sunday. And a third place in the Gita where this list is given is when Krishna describes the characteristics of one who has gone beyond the three gunas. We'll come to that later on. So let's conclude now with the prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
अथ द्वादशोऽध्यायः। अर्जुन उवाच एवं सततयुक्ता ये भक्तास्त्वां पर्युपासते ये चाप्यक्षरमव्यक्तम् तेषां के योगमित्तमाः। श्रीभगवानुवाच मय्यावेश्य मनो ये माम् नित्ययुक्ता उपासते श्रद्धया परयोपेताः ते मे युक्ततमा मताः। ये त्वक्षरमनिर्देश्यम् अव्यक्तम् पर्युपासते सर्वत्र गमचिन्त्यम् च कूटस्थमचलम् ध्रुवम् सन्नियम्येन्द्रियग्रामम् सर्वत्र समबुद्धयः ते प्राप्नुवन्ति माम्